Hollywood is busy remaking classic films and not so classic films from the past few decades. While these new versions are sometimes technically superior, they fail to catch the spark that their originals do. Any thoughts about that?
I think that there have always been cases where there have been some sequels that have been as good or better than the original movies. But I think it's very rare that a remake improves on what came before because, again, it's missing that spontaneity. I mean, you can look at a movie like the remake of Psycho, which I thought was one of the most pointless remakes you could imagine, because it was not only a remake of the story, they weren't just retelling the story, they were imitating the style of the original every step of the way. So it's like if a guitarist wants to play Stairway to Heaven, and so they play it exactly the way it was recorded. I mean, anybody could listen to the original recording and get more out of it just by doing the impression. There's nothing too interesting about that. It's more like a form of discipline. But remakes sometimes when they do work, I should say, it's in a case like David Cronenberg's movie The Fly, where he takes the basic premise of the story and creates something new around it, something that's consistent with its own time. If he had just remade the movie as it originally had been, it would have been very dull. And I think the original movie looks a little dull today, but at the time it was a very exciting picture. So you've got to keep up with science, you've got to keep up with the world. And I think the Invasion of the Body Snatchers pictures are interesting for the same reason. They each seems to represent its own time.
And I liked and I disliked both the remake of King Kong, because it's nice on one hand to see all the CGI effects of this huge ape, doing things that they could not have done before. But it's the same sort of story, and then they made it a little overlong, and it got caught up with its special effects stuff. But they did recreate the spider pit sequence also as kind of an homage to the original movie, because that footage was lost. So, or never made it into the final cut or cut out or something. So they rebuilt that as best they could from the original filmmakers' conception in photos and things. So I thought that was a great thing to do too. So I'm sort of like it and dislike it. I think if they had kept all the nice special effects that were needed and maybe just put a slight different twist on the whole King Kong thing, maybe, and made it into their own, that would have been maybe made a bit better movie. But it's a long movie, and it's a lot of redundant kind of, here's my special effects sort of thing, but it is nice to see the ape doing certain stuff. So I don't know. Most of the time it doesn't work.
They say that one of the big differences between today's filmmakers and the filmmakers that were around in the classic days is that the classic filmmakers came to movies with the background in literature and painting and sculpture and the other arts. And today, most people that make movies only have a background in movies. And I think this is one reason why we're seeing a lot of remakes, because people don't really have experience in the arts. They have movies that they feel were big influences on them, and so their way of repaying that is to try to do a remake of it. And, I can understand the impulse, but at the same time, Hollywood, to use a generic term, is cheating entire generations of people out of the original stories that this generation of writers is writing for this generation of people. And so a lot of mainstream people who may not even have the background in movies that these cineasts do who are making them are just getting a lot of regurgitated Hollywood myth-making instead of real stories that pertain to their own life and their own situation. And so I think we end up as an out-of-touch society, out of touch with our own selves.
And I sometimes think that the remakes are done too because the original ones were in black and white, And kids don't want to see black and white movies, so let's turn this whole thing into a color movie. Maybe they'll come and see it.
Do you think the musicals will make a comeback?
Probably not in the same form. I think that musicals still get made. Moulin Rouge was an interesting musical. And I understand they're going to do a remake of Phantom of the Paradise, which I think is an odd choice, but it is something they can remake. But it's a movie that we love, and I don't understand how remaking it is going to make it any better. Yeah. Because it still plays as a very contemporary sort of comedy. I think musicals will continue to be made, just not in the sense of everyday people walking around and suddenly breaking into song. You know?
I think that's already been remade with music videos. You know, they can all do their own musical that way. But I don't know. We're not that much into stage shows, so we could be completely wrong about that. There could be a whole audience out there just waiting and crying for them. We saw that movie the night we were supposed to be married. We went out to go get married and found we could only apply for the license. So we took all of our friends who were with us and we went and saw Phantom of the Paradise downtown. Then 3 days later, we hauled ourselves out, got married, and then Tim and I went to see Andy Warhol's Frankenstein in 2D.
That was all right.
Yeah.
In every issue, you spotlight films that are sometimes recent and sometimes not. How do you select those films?
Oh, I see. For the DVD spotlight section of the magazine, you mean?
Yeah.
Actually, it depends on the batch that we had in hand that time. I mean, sometimes a review will come in that's a bit longer than the others, is more in depth, and so we'll select that. And sometimes it's the movie that just seems to have an additional importance about it. Like we're doing Pan's Labyrinth for the issue that we're working on now. And sometimes it can even be a box set or a series of films that come out at the same time. So it's whatever release at that particular moment seems to have a little more gravity about it.
And also, we invented that area because after we had been doing Laserdisc and DVD section for a while, they always went alphabetically. And we always had to feature the first one kind of prominently. So whoever gets the A or the B that we start out with gets the big picture, you know? So we said, this isn't fair. If we got Pan's Labyrinth, I want that to be first, but then it's going to be out of order. So we said, let's take it out and make it the spotlight. So it could be any one of the movies that we think is very important that we want to feature with more pictures than the others, etc. So that's how we just look at what we got and say, well, let's make that one the spotlight.
You'd be surprised how few movies that begin with the letter A or B have really striking photographs.
Yeah.
To head off a section. It's hard to start up a section of videos with something like The Adventures of the Clutching Hand. It's hard to find photographic material.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking your time.
Well, thank you,
Thank you
Colin.
for talking to us.
Very sweet.